Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar on self-promoting your research. Before we get started, I'd just like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. For us here in Perth, this is Whadjuk Noongar country, and I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past, present, and their families. So my name is Associate Professor Jennifer Stone. I'm a cancer epidemiologist specializing in breast cancer research. I'm head of the Genetic Epidemiology Group within the School of Population and Global Health at the University of Western Australia. I am not an expert in self-promotion. Indeed, I signed up to, or I volunteered to give this webinar over a year ago in the hopes that it would trigger some urgent response to actively improve my efforts in self-promotion. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about those my recent experiences, but thankfully I've also enlisted the help of an expert panel to help me along. So I'm just going to quickly introduce the panel: Professor Jeff Keelan, Dr. Erin Kelty, and Ms. Christy Sullivan. Jeff?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yes, so my name is Jeff Keelan. I'm a professor at UWA and currently head of School of Biomedical Sciences. I've been a pregnancy researcher for about 40 years. For 10 years, I was a principal research fellow at the Women's and Infants Research Foundation based at King Eddie's. And until recently, I was also director of clinical research, ethics and governance at King Eddie's Hospital. And I'm also not an expert on self-promotion.
Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Kelty. I'm also not an expert, but I try my little socks off. I'm a research fellow at the School of Population and Global Health at UWA, and my kind of primary research interest is looking at how the prenatal environment, in fact, is associated with neonatal and child health. So I do a lot of research looking at drug safety in pregnancy and heat exposure in pregnancy. And a few other things. But looking forward to talking a little bit more about self-promotion today.
Thank you. Christy.
Hi, I'm Christy Sullivan. My day job is working in insurance, and my passion is supporting women's health, particularly focused around breast cancer. I am a consumer advocate with lived experience. And I'm very much looking forward to talking about and perhaps learning more about self-promotion.
Thank you very much, and you're all being very modest. So in today's webinar, I thought I'd take 15 to 20 minutes to sort of run through the who, what, when, where, what of self-promotion. Then I'll invite each of the panel members to comment and share their insight before opening up to the group for a general conversation. So feel free to pop any questions in the chat for our discussion at the end. So why is self-promotion important? Well, because research is most productive once shared. And I personally think self-promotion is really important for researchers in Australia because we are so geographically isolated. Not all great ideas are published in Nature, and so self-promotion is essential to getting our ideas out there and forming national and international collaborations to build on those ideas, advance those ideas into clinical practice. The Who, not the rock band, but I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of being able to sell yourself effectively in any audience. Also, who are your collaborators, and who are you collective, and how are you collectively promoting your research? Who's leading change in your field, and how many degrees of separation are there between your research and theirs? So, and then the what. What do we mean by self-promotion? Demonstrating the significance of your research and its contribution to the field, providing evidence of translation, implementation, and impact. We'll also talk about the tools that we have to demonstrate that evidence. And finally, the when and the how. Well, the when is always, and the how is, well, we'll talk more about, of course, media releases, conference presentations, and the benefits and pitfalls of social media. So why is self-promotion important? Well, to engaging broader audiences increases the opportunities for collaboration, translation, and impact. I've been incredibly fortunate to have trained in my native Canada as a biostatistician, and then I proceeded to do my PhD in genetic epidemiology in Australia. Did a one-year postdoc in UK, and before returning to Melbourne and now Perth. So some of my most highly cited papers have come through international collaborations, and yes, one of them was fortunately published in Nature. I'm one of 300 authors, and it from over 90 different studies across the world. And Scopus actually produces those really neat graphs in the corner with listing all the locations of the affiliations of your co-authors. So this paper identified common genetic variants associated with breast cancer risk, which have now been translated into a polygenic risk score to help identify and target women at increased risk in the general population, particularly younger women who are not actively targeted for breast cancer screening. I'm currently working with a group of GPs to incorporate that PRS, the polygenic risk score, into primary care pathways to identify and target women at increased risk. So this is a great example of the importance of self-promotion. Without, none of this would have been possible without learning how to, I guess, sell myself across various international research teams, and without the support and promotion from my peers, collaborators, and mentors. Why? Sorry, who? Who are you? It's incredibly important to be able to explain what you do, why it's important, quickly and clearly in any situation. To be honest, I still struggle with this in some situations. I like the Australian phrase barbecue speak. I first heard it used to describe an attribute lacking in Kevin Rudd long before he became the leader of the Labour Party and, of course, eventually the Prime Minister. He was accused of not speaking like the average Australian, like one would at a common backyard barbecue. So to improve his barbecue speak, he appeared on a weekly segment on the Channel 7 Sunrise program where he battled it out with his Liberal counterpart, Joe Hockey. So as a recent arrival to Australia, I found this interaction fascinating. And indeed, I learned a few valuable Australian catchphrases myself. So my tastes in morning television have significantly changed since then, but I'm still very grateful to Mr. Rudd for his valuable insight into the Australian vernacular. But I guess the academic equivalent is, of course, like a 3-minute thesis or pitch your project. And if you haven't participated in one of those kind of events as an early career researcher, I would highly recommend that you do. But like I said, self-promotion is not just about you. It's also about who you're collaborating with and how you effectively sort of promote your research as a team, not just in academia, but also in health services and industry partners, and of course the community as well, who benefits most from your research. Do you incorporate consumer engagement into your research? And if not, I think you should strongly consider that. And also, who is leading change in your field? Do you have a self-promotion pathway that gets your research to them? I would encourage you to have a think about your last 3 collaborations and how they were formed, and the benefits and what went right and what went wrong, and how you can strategically, I guess, build on those networks to get your research out there. What is self-promotion? It's demonstrating significance of your research to the field, providing evidence of impact. Now, anyone who's familiar with writing an NHMRC investigator fellowship application is very familiar with demonstrating impact. It's your contribution to the field, your team's contribution, and the overall reach and significance. If you've never written one of these and you're writing a fellowship application, I would highly recommend you contact your research office and ask for successful examples. It's also, you could try to engage people who have sat on the review committees and the review panels for fellowship applications to gain their insight and hopefully review. Evidence of impact could include things like media opportunities, speaker invitations, board invitations, of course, your usual metrics of H-index, FWCI, and the number of citations. It'd be great if you've been involved with policy change and the implementation of research outcomes. So, if you're to generate those metrics, I would also highly recommend the use of SciVal. If you're not already familiar with SciVal, go to the website and have a bit of a play around. It can generate high-level reports like this one, and lots of other useful metrics you can see listed there on the right. And they also have some great YouTube videos that show you just exactly what it's capable of. So the when and how, like I said, when is always, the how is publish and promote via social media, media releases, and media training, attend, present at conferences and networking events. It's recommended, of course, that every single time you publish a paper, you should contact your institution's media team and request a press release. And yes, I know this can be anxiety-inducing for some, but most institutions also can provide media training, which I would highly recommend. I think being able to write a succinct media release and understanding the likely sound bites are very useful skills. Obviously, you should never turn down an opportunity to present or to speak at a conference or a meeting, networking event, or even a national webinar in a subject that you're not that confident about. But you know, if you're not confident in presenting, you can. I would recommend you find someone that you do think presents really, really well, and show them your slides, get your feedback, practice, practice, practice. Of course, in front of your peers, but also invite members of the community or clinicians or other stakeholders to provide feedback. And of course, then there's social media. Does anyone frequently get emails like this? This is a message from the International Journal of EPI. Thank you, Jennifer, for publishing with us. To boost your article's research, you can just click on this blue button, if only if it was that easy. And so I clicked on the blue button and it said, okay, if you have less than an hour, use your existing networks online and in real life. You can add a link to your publication in your email signature, add information to your institutional website. There's Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Of course, check that your publication is on your institution's library collection. And you can add your book to reading lists for students, which personally I think is a step too far, but that's just me. So I said, okay, I'm going to try all these various different strategies and report back to you how they went. So my first experiment was X, formerly Twitter. And so just to, in another disclaimer, I'm not an active user of X. I'm a very passive user. Amazingly, I've been an X user since 2009, and I have apparently 129 posts, which I thought was a bit dubious. So I went on and did some detective work, and like 100 of those posts are back from 2009, when it was socially acceptable to check in everywhere you went using the Foursquare app. So, you know, I'm sure the world really cares about where I ate dinner on a Tuesday in 2009. But anyway, so that's, I'm not an active user, just highlighting that. And I have very few followers. So I posted, I tweeted the distribution of breast density across women aged 18 to 97, ! And I had 3 hashtags. And I went in, I took a screenshot of the metrics from that paper that was just published within a month prior. This is back in July. I posted this tweet. I then went to my faithful panel members and said, can you please go on X, and share the tweet. And then I again did another screenshot. And you can see that, yes, my PlumX matrix have not changed. And I have my alt metrics is now 4, because also the School of Population Health also shared my tweet. So as a a passive user of Twitter, my recommendation, if you're also of similar circumstance, would be to, if you're going to post on Twitter, then ask 10 of your friends to go on there and to share it, because apparently an alt metric of 10 is considered good. However, I'm sure there are much more successful examples of how things can be shared on Twitter and go viral. And I think hopefully our panel members will talk a little bit more about that. Experiment number 2 was LinkedIn. Again, I'm a passive user of LinkedIn. My sort of impression of LinkedIn is a place to go when you need a job, and thankfully I've not needed one of those in a long time. However, apparently this is changing, and I think Jeff is going to talk a little bit about that. I went onto LinkedIn and I posted, should breast screening programs collect height and weight information? This is another paper that's recently published. Again, took the screenshot, again, contacted the panel members and said, hey, do you mind sharing? And unsurprisingly, the metrics did not change. And as I understand it, LinkedIn posts are not captured by the algorithms that in Plumex or in Altmetrics. And then finally, my third experiment was including this statement in my email signature. So check out our latest research that describes co-design of a novel intervention to improve breast screening participation within Breast Screen WA. And you can see this is the pre and the post. And according to Plumex, my readers went up from 2 until 6. Now, this might not be a big deal, but for me, I found this very interesting, largely because during the past month, and when I have been including this email and signature in all my emails, I've been also organizing this national collaborative grant application, contacting all of the breast screening program managers and the like to be able to coordinate this national effort. And so I guess the possibility that by including this paper in my signature, that is increasing the likelihood that policymakers, particularly in breast screen, are potentially reading my papers. Well, that's really important. So I consider this progress. So out of the 3 experiments, personally, recognizing that I'm not an active user of social media, I think the email signature is something that I'm going to pursue in future, particularly because I like that you can have multiple signatures and obviously be able to pick which one depending on who you're emailing. But now I'll pass it over to the panel, and with the question, so what am I doing wrong? And Christy, I'd like to start with you from a consumer perspective. Do you think I'm even approaching this the right way?
Oh, I think you're absolutely approaching it really well. Those are the major tools that we have to reach wider audiences. One thing that I think you could do that would potentially garner a wider response to what you've put out into the world is to use a consumer story. I think people really relate to human stories. It takes the work that you're doing away from just the data and the very science terms that are all very important, but it gives it a potential application. It shows the real benefit and impact that your work can have. And I think it's something that really hooks people. So I'd suggest maybe some sort of a title and a tie-in to elevate the responses. But like you, I haven't had much success with X, I have to say.
Oh, I beg to differ. I think, you've become a consumer advocate in your field, and you've had great success attracting media attention. How, other than social media, have there been other sort of tactics that you've used to get your story out there?
I have. I've been fortunate enough to use my story nationally in the media to support some research done by Wendy Ingman in South Australia, and that it was personally gratifying. But the really important piece about that was getting information out there nationally. Was seen by many people across the country, not just scientists, which is really important to me, that there be more eyes on research that I think is going to benefit the community, but also community knowledge as well.
So just to clarify, you contacted Wendy, who's a researcher at University of Adelaide, and together you...
So Wendy had contacted or been contacted by media, and because I had reached out to Wendy in the past, Wendy thought of me when she was promoting her research, and I was very happy to lend my story to help promote her research. And I highly recommend researchers to do that. Get to know a few of the advocates in your space. Understand their stories and where they're coming from. We're very happy to, for lack of a better word, to have you use our stories to engage more people in your research.
Excellent, thank you very much. Erin, I'm going to move on to you. About a month ago, I came to you and said, Erin, what should I do? And you were incredibly helpful and you did suggest to do a media release for these papers, which genuinely fills me with dread, and also with but also because of the time that it takes, knowing that once you get a press release out there, and if it does get any traction, then you are constantly sort of bombarded with interview requests and that sort of thing. Can you maybe share some of your experiences with that?
Yeah, for sure. So when we have a paper published in our group, we strongly recommend, even if it doesn't seem like the most exciting, innovative, groundbreaking research, that we contact the media team at our university and gauge their kind of thoughts on it. And sometimes they say, oh, I don't think anyone would care about that except you, Erin. And other times they're really surprising and they'll be like, oh, that's actually super cool. We hadn't thought of that. And so put out a press release, and it's really surprising what takes off and what gets absolutely no traction whatsoever. It's largely luck and timing. We had something that I thought would not work at all, which was on horse teeth, and we thought, who would care about horse teeth? But the timing was just so perfect that it came out a couple of days before the horse's birthday, which is 1st of August. And so the Western Australian was looking for a piece on horses, and they were like, horse teeth? That sounds amazing. We would love to publish something on horse teeth. So you really never know what's going to take off and what's going to be super interesting. And a lot of it is just having a really good try. And if it doesn't work, that's cool. And if it does, just being super brave while working with the media sounds absolutely terrifying. They're generally pretty cool people to work with. They do have some short deadlines. So you might be really, really busy for a day, but they tend to kind of move on to the next thing. And that's kind of the aim of the game, isn't it? Is to be out there. So if it does get picked up, yeah, say yes and commit and be a celebrity for 15 minutes and then get back to research the next day.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Jeff, I follow you on Twitter. For me personally, the best thing about Twitter is that I get that weekly report of things that it think is interesting, and of course I click on the things that I think is interesting, which they're informing my own algorithm. It's AI at its best, and your name frequently pops up, so I'm constantly clicking on your articles. Now, I think my downfall, though, I'm not sharing those. I click on them, I think they're interesting, but should I be sharing them more?
Yeah, look, Twitter's very interesting, and I think it's actually changed recently. I joined Twitter in 2016 after going to a seminar from a neonatologist saying how great it was and how useful it was to promote your research. And I found it was really great. I really loved Twitter, not only because I think it was a good vehicle for me to contact and keep in contact with and find out about research from other researchers. As you said, particularly us in Perth, we're very isolated, and Twitter was a very good vehicle for keeping in contact and making sure that my colleagues overseas sort of knew I was still alive. I would repost their tweets, and I would obviously promote my own research when we had a paper published or when I read something that was interesting. And I think in terms of kind of career management and developing connections, it's a very good tool for that. But I think in the last year or so, it seems to have changed, and obviously they keep fiddling with the algorithms, and Elon Musk has his own ideas about how it should work. Interestingly, Elon Musk followed me a few weeks ago, which I thought, well, wow, and he actually liked one of my posts. And the interesting thing about that was that it only has 7 impressions, so almost no one saw it. But Elon Musk decided he liked it and gave it a like tick, so I was very impressed. But anyway, I'm digressing. So it seems to me that it's becoming less useful, and because the algorithm is promoting more and more sensationalist, triggering emails to posts to get people engaged. rather than focusing on things that you really like and want to see, because they're less controversial, and so you're hopefully less likely to engage. So I actually did my own experiment, like you, because I'd heard from our social media team that LinkedIn was getting to be much more of a social media dissemination kind of platform rather than as just a place that you go to when you want to promote yourself to try and get a new job. So I posted, two things happened in the school in the last week. One was we had our student prize ceremony. Where we awarded prizes for the academic performance to our students at the school. And then I also attended a big sort of function at the Chinese embassy for Barry Marshall, who was awarded a special award from China. And I posted the identical information on Twitter or X, on X and LinkedIn. And the results are pretty interesting. So the school prize got 74 impressions on X, which just means that 74 people might have glanced at it as they scrolled through, and no likes. Whereas on LinkedIn, it received 1,313 reads and 42 likes. So you might say, but are you followed by a lot more people on LinkedIn than you are on Twitter? Well, I have 1,800 followers on Twitter and 1,100 followers on LinkedIn. So, so that's not the case. It appears that LinkedIn is much more directly engaged with my people who are interested in what I'm doing, and therefore, you kind of think that it's a better vehicle, more bang for your buck in terms of time investment. The Barry Marshall one was 1,500 reads on Twitter and 56 likes, as opposed to 372 impressions on Twitter. So 3 or 4 times the difference. I think if I actually posted a research article and talked about the research, then that engagement on LinkedIn will probably be even more. Because obviously the people are interested in me because of what I do in terms of my science. So, so I think that's probably an underestimate of the difference. And I looked at a whole lot of other tweets or posts from other people in science, and quite often, very significant, like leaders in the field are only getting a few hundred impressions. Occasionally it spikes, to hundreds, maybe even thousands, but mostly they're pretty low numbers. So I think I'm getting pretty disillusioned with X in that context.
That's some really impressive numbers. Two things. How do you think you can translate those LinkedIn metrics to your metrics or to your impact statement? Is there I guess, is that considered a thing, in terms of, particularly from a reviewer's perspective? And then the second question I have for you is the time that you spend in social media in terms of, the bang for your buck, because to get that many followers and to be able to manage the feedback that comes through, I was hoping you could sort of comment on some of that as well.
Yeah, so those posts only took 10 minutes a post, and they were quite content heavy. It wasn't a quick kind of, 2-sentence thing, post and it's gone. I mean, there were pictures involved, and I had to research all the names of all the prize winners and things. And so, but it only took about 10 minutes. So that wasn't a huge amount of time. And I think LinkedIn itself recommends that you post something at least once a week. And respond to 2 or 3 things a week just to keep engaged, and that engagement drives more engagement. So that's common for all of the social media platforms. So I think on LinkedIn the time commitment is pretty small and definitely manageable. On Twitter, because you get so much other stuff in your feed, and for me, I often get, because I made the mistake of replying to someone who tried to make the point that viruses don't exist, so COVID-19 was a scam. because I engaged with that person, and then I started to get more and more of these scam, conspiracy theory people replying to me, and I felt obliged to kind of have to say, no, that's not right. This is what the science says, and that does suck up a lot of time. And I've really had to try and say, like, I'm not just doing it anymore. It's taking up too much time. If I just focused on my research and my career development sort of aspect, again, it will be a much smaller amount of time and more worth the investment. In terms of measuring the impact of that engagement, before this webinar, I actually did a bit of research because I remember reading a paper a couple of years ago showing that there was a link between people who promoted their research on Twitter and the number of citations of those papers. And I couldn't actually find that paper, but I found 3 or 4 other papers. And one of them was pretty interesting. It relates to what Erin was saying about timing. And they found, this is a paper from the UK, from London, and they did a little, well, actually, it wasn't a little experiment, it was a big experiment over 2 years, I think it was, or maybe it was 1 year, where they promoted their a set of research papers on Twitter, but they tweeted them 3 times a day for several days, and then weekly and monthly, and they had a blog as well. So they really went gangbusters. And they showed like a 3 or 4 times increase in citation rate for the papers that they logged and cited and posted versus the control group where they did nothing. So it appears that there probably is a link, but you have to really kind of put some time and effort into it. And I must admit, I've always thought that you post it once, and that's it, you've done the job done. But I think actually probably that's not really the case. You need to do it at least once a day for a week or something, because people's timelines are short and they don't often get it, and the algorithm often filters it out anyway, so they don't see it. So continual posting and engagement is key probably for that success. They did find, though, there are other papers that tried and they found no relation, but they didn't do the more intensive posting. But those papers did show an increase in the altmetric score if you post it. So it comes down to that, how do you measure the impact? In some way comes down to the altmetric score and how it's calculated, and it doesn't include, at least I don't think it includes LinkedIn engagement. So in that sense, it will be sort of like an invisible impact. But the real impact is on the people that you are engaging with that post and reading your information about your research, having your name, come up in their consciousness, stream of consciousness, reading the paper, maybe downloading it, being aware of the things that you're doing. Students often read that stuff, and then they might, come and see you and ask to do a project with you. PhD, I get asked potential PhD candidates say, I saw your LinkedIn profile, and then they go to your website and they look at your research in more detail. So there's all sorts of these other things that go on that you can't capture in a metric sense, but are still pretty important. One other thing while I've got the microphone, I think there's, I looked at some of the papers of mine that have been cited the most, and one of the things I noticed, particularly in a more recent one, is that the title, I think, is really important. If you get a catchy, simple, attractive title that really encapsulates the area that the paper's looking at, that seems to be something that people, catch on to. Or maybe they're doing a quick Google search, and your title comes up first because it closely matches what they're looking for, and so that's what they cite. Or maybe it's because other reason. But I think it's really important to think about the title, and I think a lot of really great papers are. They're not cited as much as they might have been if they'd worked on the title a little bit.
I agree. I think that the title is really important. When I was trying to come up with the titles for my tweets, and the hashtags and that sort of thing, I did think about that, but I also thought about how this could potentially be so much stronger if I had spoken to people like Christy and yourself, or to say, okay, well, how should I really be directing this message? Thanks so much for that. Please, I encourage anyone to please, if they have a question, to write it in the chat. I have another question for the panel in terms of, you mentioned it briefly, Jeff, about, I think the message about retweeting constantly, I think that's really important, particularly in the Australian time zones as well. When we're tweeting things, that's a totally, most people are half asleep. So that's, I think, a very valid point. Does anyone also use wiki pages to promote their research?
You can definitely use Wikipedia, and it's captured in your altmetrics. They don't like you self-citing though, so you either need to be super creative and not appear to be yourself, or have somebody else kind of work your citations in there. So it can be a little bit tricky to do unless you are creative. You can tell Wikipedia that it is your own citation, and then you kind of have to go through a bit of a different track to do it. But we've struggled to successfully do it. But I do have some friends who are very good at it.
I've been approached. There's a couple of emails I'll get that sort of saying there's companies that will do this for you, and I'm reluctant to obviously respond to those emails because I think I'll just get spammed with so much. But yeah, I was sort of tempted to write to them anonymously. So let's see, what can you do for me? But so I didn't get around to that. We do have a couple of questions.
Oh, Jennifer, sorry, just before that, sorry, just going back a little bit to LinkedIn, a couple of strategies that have worked really well for me have been tagging. So everyone who is involved in the particular research, if you tag them, that increases your audience, and also coordinated postings. So I might post something promoting someone else, and they may in turn post something that promotes something I'm working on. And those have had the most reposts. I have not, unlike Jeff, I haven't gone back and looked at the stats, but those are the ones that I have noticed have reached the furthest, just anecdotally.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know much about LinkedIn, and that's sort of one of the related to this question. LinkedIn does seem to be a better place to be, and better engagement with practitioners and organizations. Do you have any advice on using hashtags, et cetera, to make the most of a post to different audiences? So when you say tagging, this is someone that you want to particularly to reply, obviously, yes? Or you just...
It might be somebody that I want to draw their attention to the post, being sensitive not to exhaust people who are quite time poor already. But it might be people who are involved, certainly people who have an interest in that space. Mm-hmm.
I'm also quite a big fan of tagging UWA or the Institute, the journal, the school, because they are always looking for things to retweet, not as or repost on kind of LinkedIn. So if you include them, they tend to kind of share it more widely, and they tend to have much bigger audiences.
Yeah, the advice, if you read the advice online about how to increase the reach of your posts, then hashtagging and tagging are both, highly recommended. I haven't done any kind of systematic assessment of how well it works, but apparently it increases the reach by 5-10 times.
All right. Another question. From what I've seen, Twitter/X is now quite an unsafe or unfriendly place for the LGBTQIA+ community and Indigenous peoples. I've seen many colleagues switching to Threads or Instagram. Do you have any experience using these platforms?
I don't. I know a lot of people have left Twitter and gone into some of the alternative platforms. From what I've seen there, the audience is much, much smaller. It might be smaller and much more targeted. I don't know. I'm not in those, and I've thought about maybe opening another account somewhere else. I don't use Threads, and only very slightly on Instagram. That's a very personal thing, not work related.
Yeah. And are those metrics even picked up by the algorithms for altmetrics and PlumX and that sort of thing? Probably not. Yeah. And I'm not sure how best to use Instagram. I know for businesses and that sort of thing, whether or not that's any researchers are on Instagram, in terms of medical research. It's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure.
They tend to be if they have a really beautiful research, like some kind of pretty research that they're doing. My sitting in front of a computer doesn't have a great aesthetic, but I know people are doing sort of different work with microscopes and showing cell division and neural networks and stuff that have amazing pictures. Works really well for Instagram, and same with at like TikTok, if you've kind of got that personality where you want to explain things and disseminate information, and you can do it in a really fun and engaging way. It's amazing, but it's definitely not something that's picked up by altmetrics.
Yeah, I think I like that motivation that was popular years ago about, putting your thesis to an interpretive dance. Again, challenging to do, but if done well, it is absolutely brilliant. So does anyone use ResearchGate? Another question. Do you consider it useful for self-promotion?
Yeah, I did. When it first started, I got into it and spent quite a bit of time on it initially. More recently, I haven't engaged very much, but I do quite often find I come across people's papers posted on ResearchGate. So I go, that's how I find, research publications informally. And I think it's quite useful. And when I wasn't there a lot, I got quite a lot of engagement and I responded to a lot of queries about things. And I found it quite useful. I think it's quite good. In my grant applications, I do cite what my ResearchGate score is.
I didn't even know there was a ResearchGate score.
Yeah, it tells you what percentile you are in the world. So I stick that in sometimes when it's space. I think it's quite good. I quite like it.
Very interesting. Okay.
Same. I've used ResearchGate. Particularly, people will directly request papers, and it can be a really nice way to find out that someone actually is interested in your research, and they might send you a message. And so it's really nice to get some kind of reader feedback, and not just kind of send your paper out into the abyss and hope that someone one day reads it.
That could be an interesting, useful tool for potentially for consumers as well, right? Who don't have access to all of the journal articles. Christy, are you familiar with ResearchGate? And do you have to be a researcher to be on ResearchGate? No, so so Christy could join there, and if she needs an article, she could actually contact the authors to say, hey, can I have a copy of the PDF?
I'm learning something new. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's any other questions, please. Sorry. Consider some of the restriction by journals for sharing publications. Yes, obviously they have to be open access. Yeah, I wonder how that works, how you get around that too for ResearchGate, whether or not, if it's not an open access journal and you, well, I think it's a requirement by all the universities for your papers to be accessible.
There's a rather complicated tiering structure with different, like red, green, and blue. I can't remember exactly. So even if the paper is paywalled, you can still post it as a pre-submission, I think it is. So not the published paper, but effectively the content of the paper. So there's ways around it. They have rules about what you can and can't do, and usually you can get around most restrictions. So you do have to be aware of that. The writer's definitely correct, but it's not so restrictive that you can't get access to things.
Apparently you can send it privately, and there's a green open access version. Is that potentially what you're talking about, Jeff? During the process of research, how to engage with collaborators or other researchers or audience?
I mean, largely just ask them. People are actually really flattered to be asked to be involved in research, particularly if you're doing the lion's share of it and you're wanting some feedback on something, or you're wanting just to get their opinion. You know, if someone emailed me and was like, hey, I have this great idea for a project, do you want to be involved? I would be so happy that someone had kind of thought of me. So yeah, just give it a crack.
I've gone in person to conferences through connections that I've just sort of forged myself through sending out emails to people to introduce myself. I've gotten invites to Parliament House. There are often media, usually media representatives at those events. And I've introduced myself to them there. Rightly or wrongly, I don't know how well it worked. I actually had a little paper, it's like 8 pages long, of why I thought research in a particular area and changes to a particular area would be beneficial to the community, and gave it to this reporter. Haven't had success in that particular instance. But another time I did reach out by email to a reporter that I know. So sorry for the telephone. Nobody uses the home phone anymore, and suddenly it's ringing in the middle of this. But if we can ignore it, the reporter that I reached out to by email, who I'd seen from her byline and I could see her interest. And I did have very good success, and she did run a story. It's a year later. Sometimes things take time, but she remembered and was a very good contact. So I don't know if reaching out directly when you think that you have, or through your media organizations with recommendations, if you have done some research around reporters and their areas of interest, might also be helpful.
Great idea. There's a comment in the chat that she'd like to share the Care Knowledge Exchange platform to promote care-related research. It's free to access it to anyone, and national and international researchers are welcome to upload their work. What are the thoughts on setting up a basic website and subscribe link so new publications could be emailed out?
I'm not sure about that one. At UWA and most universities, our publications are already on our personal websites within the repository. So it sounds like it would be maybe just doubling up. I'm not sure. Yeah. I can't remember the last time I ever went to somebody's personal website to find a paper.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I really like UWA's research repository and how they've set things up. There's so much information on there that I think even if I were to set something out myself, it probably wouldn't compare. And it's, you know, up to date and has links to all your Scopus and X and whatever you need. So there's just so much information there.
Yeah. I think it's the same platform that I think it's Melbourne or Monash use, and other universities, the same architecture. It's pretty good.
All right. Is that it for the questions? I think we've covered quite a bit of ground there, which is excellent.
There was an earlier question, I can't see it now, from a PhD student asking about how to go about establishing collaborations and getting grant funding.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, my advice would be, I think we've already talked about it, is to directly contact people. You know, show your interest and show a knowledgeable interest in what they're doing. Don't spam people, because that just puts everyone off. But if you're genuinely interested and you know what you're talking about, you know, write to them and say, and establish that contact. Hopefully you can maybe meet them at a conference. Conferences are great for establishing, you know, personal connections, face to face, go out for a beer or whatever it is that works. And maybe send them some of your papers or something about your work, so that they can see kind of what you do and get a feel for what that collaboration might look like. Most people are very open to collaborations. and we'll explore it, initially, and to see whether it's going anywhere, and then just put time and effort into it if it's a profitable venture.
Fantastic. Of course, then Linda points out that we should also be engaging with our local AHRA, Australian Health Research, I want to say networks, but that's not right. Here in WA, that's the WHRTN. And each state has their own research translation networks, and encourage you, definitely to check those out. There's a vast amount of resources available there, particularly seminars like this. So it's 10 to 11. If there's no more questions, I think I might just wrap things up. 10 to 11 WA time, apologies. Before I go, I would just like to encourage everyone to complete their evaluation form. You'll receive an email immediately after this seminar, and that information goes, helps us to produce more webinars like this, what worked, what didn't, so we can continue to provide helpful information to those that need and want it. All right. So I'd like to thank my panel members immensely. Much appreciated. And thank you to everyone for coming today.